Following up on yesterday's 2-minute video regarding Ruin Johnson trolling YouTuber Mike Zeroh. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Ruin Johnson took to Twitter again after deleting 20,000 tweets in the wake of James Gunn being terminated from Disney, basically to cut off anyone who might use something he tweets against him. Well, he decided to go after Mike Zeroh over comments that were made with regards to his trilogy having been canceled. And I just thought it was pretty infantile. But the pro-Johnson trolls were kind of ganging up and claiming that Mike Zeroh had started all this by speculating whether Johnson's trilogy had been canceled. But here's the thing. The video that they were attacking came after articles in Express.uk and comicbooknews.com also asking the question, look, is the new trilogy being canceled? So this actually isn't something that Mike Zeroh even started. So reading from express.co.uk, making a trilogy of movies about one main story with 3 directors all allowed to develop their own ideas and plotlines sound rather unwise. How about greenlighting another huge big-budget trilogy with no story outline or characters at all? No wonder Disney appears to be suddenly pulling back on plans made by Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy, especially following the explosive fan reaction to The Last Jedi. And on comicbooknews.com, it's saying, to be clear, it is not known... all right, this is all pertaining to the Obi-Wan movie. Let's scroll down a bit. All right, this past June saw it reported that Disney CEO Bob Iger had a sit-down with the heads of Lucasfilm, Pixar, and Marvel to get their Star Wars franchise right, and also that Iger wanted to fire and replace Kathleen Kennedy. It has actually been said that there are those within Disney who hate what Rian Johnson did with Star Wars The Last Jedi, which may in part be backed up by what Mark Hamill has said about disagreeing with Johnson's portrayal of Luke Skywalker. In addition, Andy Serkis has publicly made it known that he hopes Snoke is still alive in Episode 9, and legendary composer John Williams also chimed in that he hopes J.J. Abrams is fixing things in Episode 9 as well. It's still further been said there are those within Disney who aren't happy that Kennedy let Harrison Ford dictate his character's death in The Force Awakens as well. There's also the fact that following James Gunn getting fired by Disney for tweets about rape and pedophilia, Ruin Johnson proceeded to delete over 20,000. And finally, we have MovieWeb.com talking about the latest episode with Mike Zeroh. So let me quote from that real quick, Larry, and then I'll get your opinion. Mike Zeroh is quite well known by Star Wars fans as he uploads new content to his YouTube channel on a daily basis. He often
multiple times a day.
yeah. So obviously has a lot of free time on his hands. He often covers the latest rumors, going over every aspect of the franchise with intel he gets from various sources. The guy isn't always right, but he never claims to have any confirmation on his rumors until it's authorized by Disney and Lucasfilm. He goes out of his way to point out speculation and theories. Because of that, his batting average isn't always great, but Zeroh really ruffled some feathers with Team Lucasfilm when he published a new video claiming Ruin Johnson's upcoming new Star Wars trilogy, which will fall outside of the Skywalker saga and feature all new characters and locations, have been canceled. Now, actually, Zeroh did not actually say that. He merely asked if this is true. And Johnson, of course, took to Twitter and then deleted the offending tweets, but, of course, not before people took screen captures. And so... yeah, Larry, I'll go ahead and...
So let's get out of some of the context of the chain of events. Let's talk realistically about some things for a moment. Rian Johnson, Ruin Johnson's a man who is trusted with $100 million plus film budgets. Mike Zeroh is a guy who has like 175,000 followers on YouTube. This is an example of punching down. And some of the comments he made about, oh, everybody makes jokes about you around the film set. First of all, if people are making jokes about YouTubers on the film set of Star Wars films, there's a broader problem going on there.
Yeah, and I actually posted a tweet on Ruin Johnson's Twitter page, basically saying, hey, Ruin, you think if you spent less time trolling people on Twitter and more time learning to write, your movies might not be so craptastic?
Well, I think
just saying.
I think the proof's going to be the pudding about if Episode 9 is split into two parts, as one of the popular rumors that are going to be.
Yeah, and I don't think, because if that rumor is true, then I find that pretty disturbing, because it says something that the guy screwed up the middle movie so badly that Abrams would have to try and do two movies. First, to kind of try and retcon the crap that Johnson did in The Last Jedi in a way that fans will accept, and then go back and tell the story he originally wanted to tell and would have told with a third movie if he hadn't had to fix what the guy did wrong in the second movie. So I hope that's not actually true, because
it's actually deeper than that. So let's kind of get right down to it. What's the story that you can tell after The Last Jedi?
Right, because the way Johnson's editors completed the final product, it makes it difficult, almost impossible, to actually do a proper wrap-up to the current trilogy. Because he was so eager to get things over with and move on to his trilogy that, he didn't care what happened to the present one, which Disney is currently focused on. But they're still interested in telling a linear storyline. Okay, let's finish this trilogy first, then, go on to yours, but you decided to jump the gun, and now we've got all this crap going on.
There's not really any story to go on from The Last Jedi. It leaves nothing really on the table. You get into a lot of threads that have gone through those two movies, but they're all pretty much end in The Last Jedi, and the ones that pass through, there's really only one way for them to go. So the only real way for this to be improved is to have Episode 9 split into two movies, and then you need to add a further level of analysis to this situation. The Disney streaming service is starting. You have the Game of Thrones guys allegedly doing a trilogy of movies. You have Rian Johnson doing a trilogy of movies, but it's unclear whether the market has an interest in them.
Right, especially since Han Solo movie basically lost money at the box office.
Yeah, but that was more to get the Kasdans on board with the reboots in the new trilogy.
Right, which they may actually have trouble finishing. But again, kind of getting back to the original topic, because my main concern with this is that Johnson is supposed to be representing Disney and Lucasfilm, and yet he keeps engaging in provocative behavior that is designed to alienate fans. And going after a YouTuber, it might stroke his ego, but what does it actually accomplish? Because going back to MovieWeb, it says, along with Rian Johnson, Pablo Hidalgo is another Star Wars content creator and contributor who has attacked fans on social media. Many have mixed feelings about these creators jumping in the mix. Johnson obviously had second feelings about it too, or he wouldn't have deleted his tweets so quickly. Furthermore, some Lucasfilm insiders continue to exist that Kathleen Kennedy will be gone come this September, well, it's September now, and that Rian Johnson will go with her, not even giving his fans the first chapter in his proposed new Star Wars trilogy. So, and then they show the screen caps of the tweets in question. Well, some of them. I've got more of them on my blog. So you can go ahead and look that up. That'll be in the link in the description. But it seems to me like if you're trying to insist that your new trilogy is still going, why would you keep doing things that further jeopardize you having that trilogy? Because if the reports are true that Iger is unhappy with Kathleen Kennedy and wants her gone, and pretty much anyone associated with her who still defends her at Disney or who sucks up to her, the last thing you want to do is continue to give him reasons to get rid of her, because once she's gone, you're gone. So why does Johnson keep doing this? I mean, it's like he has no... I hesitate to bring more political stuff into this, but it seems like he's like the Donald Trump of cinema, almost. because he can't seem to stay off Twitter insulting people.
Well, you also want to take into consideration some other things. September, we have Star Wars Fan Fest coming up. We have the build up to Episode 9, which is going to come in December of next year. We have the opening of the Star Wars Land at the Disney theme park. So until Episode 9 comes out, Disney's going to want it to look like, oh yeah, we're still working on the Rian Johnson trilogy. We're still working on these other trilogies, even though we haven't actively been spending anything on production. We're still producing them, though. Don't worry, guys.
Right, and that brings me to another conclusion: Disney was pretty much counting on the movies to really provide a bulk of the support for, like, the financial support for the theme parks, and the movies are now losing money. So I don't see how they're going to be able to open on time. The more Johnson keeps opening up his mouth, because that just makes more movies unlikely, because no one's going to want to go see them.
And the thing is, he said that he was given the movie when he decided, when he was working on The Last Jedi, without an actual pitch. He said, I just want to do 3 movies about another galaxy, I guess, for Star Wars, with stuff that's totally different, but totally Star Wars.
Right, and obviously, Please Kennedy, who, according to rumors, and again, none of this is confirmed. I should point this out. These are just rumors because Disney obviously is not confirming or denying anything. They still haven't confirmed or denied rumors of Kennedy's departure this month. Mm-hmm. So, at this point, all we can do is actually just speculate. But
and there's also rumors going around the internet that even if Kennedy's not gone this month, they're going to have a second restructuring of Lucas in January.
Right, but the point I wanted to make though is, even if you get rid of Kennedy, or even if you keep her around and Johnson still has his trilogy, well, first of all, Star Wars is not something you do without any kind of plan or vision for where you want to go. And Johnson simply seems to have no vision, except for destroying the visions of others. Because, as bad a movie maker as Jar Jar Abrams is, he at least had a plan, apparently, and left it behind for Johnson to follow. He tossed it in the trash, according to Daisy Ridley and Abrams, and, just proceeded to do this thing, which was a directionless mess. So, how is he going to do a new trilogy without any... He probably doesn't even have a screenplay yet. He probably... And there's no outline, there's no storyboards, no characters. You're just going to do whatever. I mean, that's not how you do not how you do any franchise.
And
let alone Star Wars.
And there's somebody who's leaked back-to-back The Force Awakens as well as The Last Jedi. Excuse me. They leaked back-to-back The Last Jedi and Episode 9 storyboards. So they may be holding off on doing storyboards because they're not even sure who internally is leaking things.
Yeah, so, and frankly, at this point, I can't say I blame them, because everything that's been leaked out suggests that these people at Lucasfilm right now have no idea what they're doing. I mean, this makes me pine for the days when George Lucas still owned Lucasfilm. And because as bad as the prequels were, and they were pretty bad, they're still miles ahead of anything that's being produced by Disney. So I don't understand what's going on here. I don't understand why Rian Johnson still has a job, much less is still being allowed to post on Twitter, alienating the fans. Because at this point, he's gone from being a loose cannon to a liability for Lucasfilm, and through that, Disney itself. Because again, if you believe the rumors about the meeting with Bob Iger and the heads of the other Disney properties, they're not having the problems that Lucasfilm is having. Marvel's still doing well, even though their movies are kind of hit and miss, but they're more consistently getting hits over misses. Pixar,
they got that one problem at Pixar. Yeah. They got that one problem.
Yeah, and we shall not mention that here yet. That'll be for another entry. But
for those who don't know, there's a sexual harassment problem at Pixar, a bad one. The head of Pixar, the guy who's thought up everything they have there, he's not been able to do anything because he He's a Harvey Weinstein type.
Ah, okay. So, yeah, we'll definitely be getting into that because we've got some stuff to talk about with Asia Argento as well that I want to get into for next episode. Uh, but there's, I don't know, it just seems to me like, yeah, and yeah, there are problems at Pixar, but that's more behind the scenes stuff. In terms of actual content, like The Incredibles 2, if I remember, that actually hasn't done all that badly.
It was a good movie.
Yeah, so, I
It,
mean,
it wasn't as good as the original Incredibles, but
right, well, the
that's
sequels are
what can't
seldom
be.
as good as the original, so I kind of cut it some slack.
Yeah.
But then Toy Story trilogy, I thought that was kind of good
Mm.
because they waited so many years between sequels, and they waited until they actually had something to, that they actually waited until they had a story to tell.
I'm not necessarily sure how I feel about Wreck-It Ralph Wrecks the Internet.
Yeah, I'm kind of not feeling that either. So
I will say it's a better version of what the Emoji Movie tried to do, so that's something.
yeah, John Lasseter left Disney following sexual harassment complaints. This is as of June 8th
Yeah.
of this year. But yes, and like I said, all these links will be in the description box. So feel free to click those. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that Ruin Johnson is basically a child who's failed to grow up in any meaningful capacity, and he has no inclination to grow up. And to me, it's like, if I'm Disney, if I'm Bob Iger, I don't want a clown like this representing my company. Which is why I'm still, like I said, I'm still amazed that Johnson and Kennedy still have jobs here because it just seems like, and Kennedy at least has been smart enough to keep her mouth shut since the rumors began circulating of her departure.
Well, I think she probably has something to lose. I'm sure she has a nice golden parachute in her contract.
Right. And with Johnson, it just seems like, has anyone actually told him that his trilogy is no more?
I think the decision probably hasn't officially been made. I think it's one of those scenarios where it's stillborn right now because the studio doesn't know what direction they want to take this franchise anymore.
All right. Well, my thinking is fire Kennedy, get rid of Johnson, clean house. They pretty much have to finish up episode 9 because that's already, I think they've just started production. But that doesn't mean that they can't still proceed with Kennedy and Johnson gone. Because Abrams can get the movie finished, and as long as the incoming head of Lucasfilm just leaves them alone to try and salvage this, then, there's a chance to salvage Star Wars. So, to me, if I'm Bob Iger, I probably would have just fired them already and just said, look, you're not getting your trilogy. This is official confirmation. It's not happening. You're fired.
The big issue then is that becomes the big news. Stock value takes a hit, and all the big Disney stockholders start laying into it.
Right. And that brings me to my next thing is, if I'm a Disney stockholder, or if I'm an investor, I'm not going to want to invest money in something as long as Johnson and Kennedy are still around because they're hurting the brand. And the only thing that's going to assuage my fears is, clean house and get people in there who can restore my confidence. I'm not going to invest money in something that's going to lose my investment. I want to make a return on my investment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to happen with the Star Wars movies performing like Solo. Or even like The Last Jedi, where, because investors don't want to be told, okay, well, you might get your money back, possibly,
Now,
but you're probably not going to get any interest on your investment. Because if I'm China, I'm not going to want to flush money down the toilet on something. Especially after the last one, they said The Last Jedi insulted their intelligence. They're not Chinese investors aren't going to want to plop money down on that.
And I think, honestly, there's going to be a really serious question going forward. But again, I don't think Bob Iger wants to pull the trigger until he has a plan.
Yeah, and that concerns me that there doesn't seem to be a plan right now. You know, I mean, I hate to channel Oscar Isaac as Poe because I don't care for either one of those.
But Oscar Isaac made a valid point.
Yeah, but, he didn't make a valid point as Poe. It's like, we need to know the plan. I mean, you don't need to, tell it to everyone. But your senior staff, yeah, you do still, and especially the people who are actually out there fighting, you do need to actually keep people in the loop so that they know what to tell their people. So, especially in a crisis situation, they need to have confidence that leadership knows what it's doing. And right now, I mean, like I said, I don't want to see a return to the Michael Eisner era, but you never saw these kinds of public problems under his tenure. Aside from Roy Disney bitching about what he was turning the company into, which is a legitimate beef, don't get me wrong.
Which led to us getting Bob Iger.
Right. But Bob Iger, and don't get me wrong, he's done well with the Marvel acquisition, although the comic books continue to plummet in quality. That's I think if you're going to focus on the movies, fine. If you're going to focus on the TV shows and Netflix, great. But, you got to save the comic books because those are the ones that are the basis for the movies.
But the Pixar acquisition worked out well for them. Marvel worked out well. Lucasfilm worked out well. Those three things built upon each other. And now they're
Abrams and Kennedy and Johnson.
And now their master plan is to build a fully operational streaming service Death Star to destroy media audiences. Yeah,
except they can't even get the original trilogy or the prequels until years from now. I think it's 2020 at least, or 2022. I forget how long, but yeah, it's like, why would you have a streaming service without content to launch? This is a problem that CBS had because, they basically used the Star Trek property to launch All Access, but that's really the only thing other than sports that they had, and people aren't even tuning in for the sports.
Yeah, they are now going to start. I think the Magnum reboot's a All Access exclusive, I think.
Yeah, and if it's as bad as STD, I'm pretty sure no one's going to want to watch.
Well, Higgins is now a young woman who's a former British secret agent.
Okay, I can see this is not going to go very well.
And the guy who they hired, he's no Tom Selleck.
No, I don't imagine he is. And that
it may be complicated to find anybody else who could be a Tom Selleck.
Yeah, pretty much. Which, okay, so we're going to change the subject now because this is giving me a massive headache. So we're going to talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Because according to according to TheVerge.com, I was about to say entertainment because of the corner there. But Buffy the Vampire Slayer reboot showrunner clarifies it's not a reboot. Monica Owusu-Breen's tweeted reassurances apply as a 20 years later sequel series with the new Slayer. Reboot has become a contentious word, while risk-averse producers are perpetually looking for familiar films and TV to bring back in new forms, with the expectation that the new versions will have a built-in fandom. The seemingly endless wave of lackluster reboots of popular properties seems to be taking a toll on fans, and every new reboot announcement sparks a wave of online backlash. One of the most recent kerfuffles involved the announcement that Midnight Texas creator Monica Owusu-Breen was working with Joss Whedon on a new version of his signature show, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Initial reports suggested their new show would be a reboot with a woman of color in the title. Actual information about the planned show was thin as of its initial announcement, apart from a producer's statement that read, "Like our world, it will be richly diverse, and like the original, some aspects of the series could be seen as metaphors for issues facing us all today." But after a wave of negative response to the suggestion that the show might be looping back to the Buffy character's starting point and retelling the same stories with different actors, Owusu-Breen put out a statement via her Twitter suggesting the show is actually a sequel centered on a new character entirely.
But I'm not sure how you get there from the ending that the series had.
Yeah, and, well, if you remember the Frey comic book, which is kind of considered semi-canon or canon, according to Joss Whedon, that's set like centuries after. Right. So, but, I think, but, if you keep in mind, though, that the ending of the series in 2003 had a whole bunch of Slayers being activated, so that it's not just Buffy Summers, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar. So, there is actually potential to bring back with a new Slayer, because let's face it, Sarah Michelle Gellar, she's 40. A lot of the other actors, Allison Hannigan, who played Willow, she's my age, 44. So, and, of course, James Marsters, who's played Spike, he's in his 50s. And so is Juliet Landau, who played Drusilla. David Boreanaz is pushing 50, if he's not past the 50 mark. So you really don't want to be bringing back a bunch of middle-aged people to play their old roles unless you have a story to tell, so why not just start fresh? And it seems to me like, this is probably a better idea to go ahead and start with in the same continuity, but with a new generation. Kind of like Buffy the Next Generation.
Again, the way that they ended that story, I don't know how you build the new threat.
Yeah, well, there at the end, Giles had mentioned that there's another Hellmouth right here in Cleveland, Ohio, which, yeah, that was kind of a dig at us.
Is it underneath the Browns Stadium?
It would seem to be, because the Browns just, I don't know what's going on with them. I think they actually won a game, but if it's preseason, then it doesn't count. So, yeah, they're
the Browns,
last season they set a spectacular record, not a single win the entire actual season. All their wins were preseason when it didn't count.
The Browns is an organization mathematically, since the rebirth of the Browns, have lost more games than its random statistical probability would say they should have lost.
Yeah, and that's true. And I'm a Clevelander and a Browns fan, and I still have to agree with that statement. Oh, Lord. But yeah, but, I like I said, I'm glad it's at least a sequel and not a reboot, because the Charmed reboot is looking to be a clusterfuck. It's like reboots really haven't been doing all that good.
And if you're going to reboot it, then you need to find a way to tell the core story in a way that's reflective of what's going on right now. The core story of Buffy and Charmed, really, you tell it the same way as you told it back then. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right, which kind of defeats the purpose. And and another thing is, if this is a sequel instead of a reboot, then you can't make the claim, oh, well, this show isn't for you if you don't like it. Well, because it is actually for the original fans. It's actually meant to be that. Whereas, with shows like CBS and the new Star Wars movies and a whole bunch of other stuff that's been, the Ghostbusters reboot, it's like, if it's not made for the fans, without whom you wouldn't even have a freaking reboot in the first place, I mean, it's like they have contempt and scorn for the very audience that made it possible for them to do the movie in the first place. And they're making it for audiences who really don't care about this stuff because they weren't alive to see it when it was first on. So they're not going to want to go for it necessarily. So you're basically wasting time and money and effort all on something that nobody's going to want to watch. So to me, this is potentially a good thing. I mean, yeah, we can kind of shudder the way we did when the prequel trilogies came out for Star Wars. But, because, lightning can only be captured in a bottle once. it seems. So I'm going to have reservations about it, but I'm I'm a little bit likelier to give it a chance than if this were just a straight up reboot.
I mean, I'm sure, given that Midnight Texas was a pretty good show and Joss Whedon's involved, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, because I mean, Wheaton's had his own hit and misses, but he's still consistently better than he is worse. And like you said, Midnight Texas, I haven't actually seen that. So can you give me a little bit of explanation of what that's about?
Give me a second here, because it's been a while since I've seen it. So, all right. So Midnight Texas was basically an urban fantasy series, very similar to True Blood, which the author wrote, based the same show, came from. It's a show that featured a psychic, a pawn shop owner, a witch, an assassin, a fallen angel, a vampire, and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so basically Supernatural Texas.
Kind of, sort of.
All right.
It only lasted 10 episodes. I mean, I'm the easy mark for that sort of a show. Like, I love the Dresden Files TV show, even though it was nothing like the books.
All right. Well, now that's got me interested because, because it sounds like something that actually is pretty unique and, well, I mean, not unique, but, putting those characters into a Texas setting actually. Because I always wondered, like, if Count Dracula were a cowboy. And there's actually a 50s B movie, or maybe it was early 60s. It was black and white. But there's actually a B movie featuring a vampire in, it was either Texas or Mexico. I think it was Mexico, where Dracula is basically a cowboy who operates at night, even though nighttime apparently still looks very much like high noon. So, that's how much of a B movie this was. But it kind of sounds like something that would be right up that alley. So if it's as cheesy and well written as I suspect it'll be, it should be interesting to watch.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm sure it'll be fine. It's just, I think, given how good Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV series, was.
Yeah, it's difficult to live up to it because even Angel, which ran concurrently for much of its run, it stumbled in the fourth season because they went with this overcomplicated and frankly rather silly storyline involving Angel and his vampire sire Darla being resurrected, and then they have a son who gets raised in a hell dimension, and Cordelia, who's a carryover from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It all gets convoluted and cheesy, and
then the final season they become the people managing the local branch of who was the evil corporation for the series, and they find a basically Lovecraftian horror, and they put her into the body of one of the British staffers who works there. Yeah, so
it's actually no, they put her in the body of one of the series regulars, actually.
Yeah.
And that character was from Texas, although Amy Ackerman, I think, is from California.
Okay. Her accent was odd, but it didn't seem like Texas.
Yeah, well, she was doing a fake accent because she went back to her original accent for the Lovecraftian character that they had her play. Which was a lot more natural. I didn't care for that fake hick accent. But yeah, I mean, so, just kind of the point I'm making is that, even though Angel wasn't quite as good, but, there is a law of diminishing returns where you've told your story, it's pretty much over. I mean, you carried it over for a few more years in comic book form, but it's, the story's done. And
they
so
had a really interesting sort of arc with Angel that ended in a weird episode where Angel and Spike were both trying to chase down Buffy for some reason.
Yeah, and there were actually a couple different versions of that. There was a book written by Christopher Golden that resolves it much differently. And it's kind of like a season 8 for Buffy, season 6 for Angel. But, the whole thing is just. And then, of course, the comic book, which is considered canon, does a whole different line for that. But yeah, the writing on both shows was still pretty good. But 20 years later, you really have to have an actual story to tell here, and maybe that's why they're starting it over, essentially with all new characters. Because again, bringing back the old characters, like I said, they're all middle aged or starting to get geriatric, and it's like their stories are already told. It's over and done with. So you really kind of have to start over. But setting it in the same continuity as a previous show, I think it would probably be the least disruptive and probably the least likely to piss people off. Because if this ends up being like Cobra Kai, which I hope it is, then I'm fine with it. Because Cobra Kai, you had respect for the original show or the original films going into this, and you're actually continuing the story in a way that actually brings a new perspective on some of the characters from the original trilogy. Because from what I've been reading about season 2 of Cobra Kai, John Kreese is allegedly getting a storyline where we start peeling back the layers of his psyche and kind of
Nice.
and start analyzing and what makes him tick. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he's changed for the better, but you do understand him more and what shaped him and why he is the way he is. So that kind of writing that kind of respects the original and at the same time tries to tell a new story. That's the kind of stuff that I like. That's the kind of revival that I want to see.
Also, The Incredibles 2 has done $600 million in the United States.
Which is not bad.
No. It's the first animated movie to do that this year.
Yeah, Pixar, they're doing pretty well, at least with the movies, if their behind-the-scenes stuff is not going well for them.
And the global take is $1.122 billion.
Yeah, so doing very well indeed. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up from my end, unless you got something you want to talk about.
Well, we've asked for some assistance because there have been some glitches, which some of you who've actually watched the YouTube channel might have seen, but we're going to have a special guest, John Malin. We're scheduling that for Sunday afternoon for a live stream. John Malin is one of the independent creators involved in Comicsgate. He's creating a new comic book, which is what if the Universal movie monsters were the X-Men?
Yeah, and it's just an interesting concept because I actually had an idea similar to that back in the 90s, except instead of the X-Men, it was the A-Team. Well, it was early 90s, late 80s when I came up with the idea, so, try not to fault me too much. But it seemed appropriate for the time.
It's
and
like
I even
the
had
high...
I even had a song by Queen picked out in my head to be the opening for a planned TV show.
But I mean, that's the perfect high-budget schlock concept movie now.
Yeah, and it actually could work, but yeah, it was something I wrote up as a high schooler, trying to make. I wanted originally to go into comics and eventually branch out into movies and TV, and obviously it didn't work out, but it was one of those things where it's like it seemed like a good idea at the time, and here it is 25 years later, and having this idea kind of sort of reflected in a comic book form. I gotta say, I like it. So I want to see where this goes. So we'll be
and
it'll be fun talking because he's actually worked for Marvel and also for Image too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting things we can look into here with this whole thing, because the Comicsgate movement and all this independent crowdfunding of comics is very interesting.
Yeah, because a lot of projects now, and this is where I think Hollywood really needs to check itself here, because they're throwing all this money from investors, corporate investors, and as a result, they're risk averse, and so they end up taking all the wrong risks. Whereas if you're getting money from lots of different little sources, I mean, uh, because Graveyard Shift, which is the name of the comic book that's going to be discussed next week, they've raised $40,000 on a goal that was originally what, about 2,000 or so.
Like around 10.
Yeah, so
It's
around,
that and 10's more or less what it's cost to actually pay the artists and run the production.
okay, so basically about 4 times what they actually set out to raise. So yeah, I mean they've done pretty well. So and it's got to the point where they're using the extra money to kind of help fund some of their colleagues' projects. So yeah, this is something that will be very interesting. We've got some pretty good questions to ask Mr. Malin.
And also, the guy behind Cerberus, who's been sort of blacklisted, kind of sort of by the comics industry, he's joining in on this. The guy who did Earthworm Jim's has one that's currently being produced. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on.
Oh yeah, definitely. So be sure to tune in next week, Sunday afternoon, about what'd say about 1 o'clock.
Around 1 o'clock.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, next Sunday, that is September 9th, 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Stay tuned. Interview with John Malin of Marvel and Image, and coming up with a new comic book called Graveyard Shift. So this is Michael Wilk and Larry Bernard for the Wilk Report saying take care, good night, we're out.